Hi, this is Lucy Taylor with my final project for architectural theory. This project asks a question. What does architecture owe to a landscape after a fire has passed through it? My project is the Inspiration Point Post-Wildfire Habitat Restoration Facility. My comparison project is the Tirpitz Museum by Bjarke Ingels in Denmark. I'll be reading through 3 theoretical frameworks from this course: collective memory, sustainability, and post-colonial place theory. Before this course, I thought architectural theory was separate from design, something that we study and not something that we implement. What I understand now is that every design decision already contains a theoretical position. The question is whether we can name those. I'm applying 3 frameworks here. One is Module 2's collective memory lens, which is how architecture holds traumatic events without freezing them. The other is Module 5's sustainability lens, not the technical side, but the discursive question of whose idea of nature we're working with. And also modules 1 and 3 together, which cover post-colonial and place theory, the argument that good architecture responds to the specific intelligence of its site and its community. I chose these 3 because they're the ones that, when I applied them to my own project, showed me the most about what I had been doing intuitively and what I have gotten wrong. Will Rogers State Historic Park sits in Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles County. The project site is Inspiration Point, which is the summit of Inspiration Loop Trail at about 750 feet elevation with panoramic views from the Santa Monica Mountains out to the Pacific. What makes this site specific is that it's at the intersection of a major wildlife corridor connecting the mountains to the coast. Prevailing Santa Ana winds from the northwest, 266 sunny days a year, and before the fire, it was a beloved destination. People walked up here to sit on that bench and look out at this view. That's not just an ecological fact, it's a cultural one. Will Rogers State Historic Park sits in Pacific Palisades, Los Angeles. The project site is Inspiration Point, the summit of the Inspiration Loop Trail, at about 750 feet in elevation with panoramic views from the Santa Monica Mountains to the Pacific. What makes this site specific is that it's at the intersection of a major wildlife corridor connecting mountains to the coast, prevailing Santa Ana winds from the northwest, and 266 sunny days a year. And before the fire, a beloved destination. People walked up here to sit on that bench and look out at this view. That's not just an ecological quality, it's a cultural one. The Palisades fire burned through here in January 2025. You can see the before and after, green on the top, and what it became below. Brown and stripped, the path's still visible, but everything else is gone. More than 23,000 acres. The historic ranch house was destroyed, and between 23,000 and 230,000 animals were displaced or killed. An Inspiration Point, that bench, that view, and that community ritual was reduced to silence. What the fire also did was reveal. It stripped the vegetation down to the raw topography. The sculptural form of the hill was suddenly visible in a way it hadn't been, and this project begins from that revelation. The design concept comes from 3 forces already active in the post-fire landscape: fire, flora, and fauna. Each one corresponds to a spatial layer and a temporal role. Fire is the sky layer, the part of the building that lifts off the ridge, that erupts upward in the way fire moves. This is about energy and impermanence. Flora is the surface layer, the green roof seeded with fire-following native species. The building's roofscape becomes a restoration zone as much as a building surface. Fauna is the subterranean layer, shaped around the refuge needs of returning wildlife. The building's deepest layer is designed for non-human users. The three strata create three completely different spatial experiences in the same building. At the sky level, you're exposed. There are views to the Pacific, shade structures, the body looks up and out. At the surface, you walk across the ridge as if the building weren't there. The roofscape reads as landscape. An inspiration point is preserved. Below grade, everything changes. The temperature drops, it's quiet. The weight of the earth is above you. Light enters through carved apertures. This is the memory layer where you feel the fire before you think about it. Here is the elevation and the section. You can see the radiating form from the upper level, wings extending from the central core, and how the building tucks into and below the hillside at the mid and lower levels. The elevation shows the building's relationship to the ridge profile. And what I want to note is that the building doesn't sit on the landscape. It folds into it, the formal language coming from the topography and not from the architecture. Here are the roof plan and the site plan. Here are the east and west elevations, along with the south elevation. I named this project theme Beautiful Ghosts, a Shelter for Return, because after a fire, the landscape isn't empty. It's full of what was there, the memory of the trees, the paths, the animals, and the community. Those presences are real, even if they're invisible. The building is not trying to replace what was lost. It is more trying to create the conditions for things to come back on their own terms. So it is more of a scaffolding, not a substitute. I named this project Beautiful Ghosts, a Shelter for Return, because after a fire, the landscape isn't empty. It's full of what was there, the memory of the trees, the community, the paths, the animals. Those presences are real, even if they're invisible. The building is not trying to replace what was lost, but to create the conditions for things to come back on their own terms. The facility is a scaffold for return. The Tirpitz Museum was completed by Bjarke Group in 2017 in Blavland, Denmark. It is 4 museums in one structure. All are buried beneath the sand dune. From above, almost nothing is visible, just the dune with 2 paths cutting into it. The detail I find most theoretically loaded is what Bjarke calls the preservation loophole. The site is a protected nature reserve. Construction is normally prohibited, but the dune is man-made. It's a wartime burn, and it's not technically natural, so the preservation law didn't apply. It's not just a legal detail. It goes directly to Module 5's question, who gets to define what counts as nature, and whose version of preservation governs? Module 2's key claim is that memories are too various and plural to be locked up in stone. The most sophisticated memorial architecture stays open and evolves with the community's understanding of what happened. Both the Tirpitz and my project are doing memory work, but they're doing it at different moments in the life cycle of trauma. The Tirpitz bunker has had 80 years for its meaning to stabilize. It's become interpretable, exhibitable. Bjarke Group can place it at the center of a museum because people have had decades to process what it means to be occupied and to survive. The fire is different. It happened in January 2025. This trauma is still registering as affect, not as meaning. My building doesn't try to interpret the fire. The subterranean level attempts to make you feel it. Module 2 says trauma doesn't have meaning, it registers affects. And that is exactly what this subterranean level is designed to do. Module 5 changed how I think about sustainability. I used to think of it as primarily a technical question, This course showed me it's also a discursive one. Whose idea of nature and for whom and at what cost? The Tirpitz sustainability story starts with that preservation loophole. The dune is man-made. It was always a constructed landscape, but the act of building there required redefining what counts as natural. And that is a political decision. My project faces a different version of the same question. There's no intact system to preserve. The fire destroyed it. So I'm arguing for restoration toward a specific ecological vision, that of pre-fire native California chaparral. That's not a neutral choice. It's an argument about what this landscape should become. Module 5 says sustainability always involves that argument, whether you name it or not. Hosagrahar's post-colonial argument for Module 1 is that strong architecture responds to the specific character of its region, site, and context. It is modern, but particular to a place. My project is, I think, the most particular and local project I've designed. Every decision traces back to this specific site. And the Maya Lin parallel from Module 3 is intentional. As her Vietnam memorial works through the body's descent, you walk down into the earth, and the weight of what happened settles on you. The subterranean level of my building works the same way. You're not told about the fire, you feel what it did. And Tirpitz speaks to Danish national identity. My building speaks to a neighborhood and a specific community's relationship to one hilltop. What struck me when I first looked at the Tirpitz carefully was how structurally similar the formal logic is to my project. Both buildings preserved the original topography intact and cut into it rather than sit on it. Both make the existing wound the spatial and the emotional center. Both refuse to announce themselves above the horizon. The deepest shared commitment is the temporal one. Neither building is conceived as finished at construction. The Tirpitz deepens as its cultural meaning accumulates. My building heals as the ecology recovers. Both buildings have time designed into them as a material, and both were designed in landscapes altered by human action before the design arrived. The differences are where theory does its most productive work. Here we compare the type of trauma, the human role, the scale of the community, and the landscape conditions for both projects. Two opposite starting conditions and two very similar formal logic. I designed the Will Rogers project before this course. Looking at it through the theoretical framework and lenses, I can now name some of the things that I was doing intuitively and see where that intuition was correct, but incomplete. I knew the subterranean level mattered, but I did not know that was phenomenology. I knew the building shouldn't be permanent, but I did not know that was vernacular theory. I knew the fire wasn't just destruction. I didn't know that reframing was a contestable theoretical position. And Module 5 showed me that embracing fire as part of the ecological cycle is a specific argument about nature that not everyone would accept. Theory has shown to be most useful when it identifies what you missed. 3 honest critiques. First, I didn't consult the community. I speak on behalf of the people who lost Inspiration Point, but I never asked them. Aravena's method for Module 4 would produce a fundamentally different building. Second, whose ecology am I restoring? I chose pre-fire native chaparral, but that's my vision and it's political. The indigenous Tongva relationship to this land is absent from my design. And third, does the architecture trust the landscape enough? Compared to the Tirpitz, which disappears more completely, my building is still quite assertive. If I genuinely want architecture to recede as the landscape recovers, maybe the initial formal gesture should be quieter. The most important shift is that theory isn't something you apply after design, it's the structure of the design question itself. Before a form decision, ask what theoretical claim is embedded in this choice. Before a site decision, read what is already present before proposing anything. Before calling a project sustainable, ask whose nature, whose restoration, and whose vision. And build in time. Design for succession, not permanence. The best move is often the one that creates conditions for something to happen. One of the surprising and unexpected things about this semester is how much these three courses, the studio course, the research, and the theory course, have been asking the question from different angles. The theory course gives me the theoretical argument that architecture should read what is already present in a site before proposing any form. The design studio gave me the attempt to practice that reading. And my research class asks whether artificial intelligence as a genuine design partner can systemize that reading, can hold the complexity of a site's intelligence and help architecture emerge from it rather than be imposed onto it. So 3 courses, 1 question. How does architecture learn to listen to what a site already knows? What I take from this is that the strongest theoretical frameworks don't contradict good design. They name it and they identify what is missed. Collective memory gave me language for the subterranean level. Sustainability theory showed me my ecological choices are political. Post-colonial place theory confirmed that the insistence on particularity was the right instinct, even if it needs to go further. The Tirpitz and the Will Rogers facility share formal DNA. Their differences are where the theoretical frameworks reveal the most. The question of how architecture learns to read a landscape is not answered by this project. It is opened by